Have you asked yourself, should I use a land trust or limited liability company to hold my investment real estate? Well, listen, it's a question I get asked a lot. Which one is right for me? With so much confusion and misinformation out there, it's easy to see why investors are always unsure about which way to go. Well, in this video, I'll break down the key differences and advantages and considerations of using limited liability companies and land trusts to hold your rental real estate. I'm going to clarify this murky area, ensuring that you walk away with a solid understanding of which option best suits your real estate investment strategy. Okay, let's get started. All right, so when it comes to land trust and LLCs, I mean, there's a lot of people out there that are in one camp or the other. When I read through listservs, say Bigger Pockets is one of them, I see a lot of people pushing for land trusts, and then you see other people saying LLCs, and then you got a camp of individuals that say don't do anything. And they're the most scary ones to listen to because they always want to put their head in the sand and think that insurance is going to protect them in the event of a lawsuit. And you know what? I've seen plenty of situations where that does not happen. So you got to make sure you're choosing the right type of structure for your overall planning. And that structure has to be accomplishing many different goals, namely this, that when you're setting up your structure, what you want to make sure of, number one, right, is that you're going to have asset protection. Right, that's really why we're doing all of this. We want to ensure that our assets are going to be protected, whichever type of entity we're going to be setting up for ourselves. The second issue you're going to run into are taxes, right? When I refer to taxes, I'm not talking about federal taxes, all right? That has nothing to do with it. What I'm referring to here are state transfer taxes. Hey, you move property into an entity, next thing you know, you get billed because your tax rate went up on that particular property on the transfer, or they have a transfer tax. So that's a consideration that we need to be aware of when we're using these types of entities. The third one is going to be what we all talk about, due on sale clause. Okay, that's that acceleration clause in your mortgage that gives the lender the ability to call your note due whenever that property has been transferred. Now, there's a lot of chatter about this going back probably 25 years. I mean, as long as I've been in practice, I've always come up or heard about the due on sale clause. And I talk about it a lot in my videos as well. And we talk about ways to avoid that, that issue. So the due on sale clause is a problem. And the fourth one is anonymity. All right. If we're going to go to the trouble of setting up a structure, why not set that structure up so that individuals who may be searching for a deep pocket defendant, and I own a lot of property, they don't know how many properties I own, or better yet, they don't know where those properties are located. Last thing I want is a disgruntled tenant finding out who the actual property owner is for that particular property. So these are four main issues that we oftentimes will evaluate when we're looking at which type of entity to put together. And it's not an exhaustive list. I mean, there's a lot of other things you can look at. If you're maybe going in to be a joint venture with another party, or what types of investments you're using for these particular entities, commercial or residential. I just don't have the time to go into all that, or this video would be an hour and a half long. So LLCs versus land trusts. What do we want to look at here when we're breaking these things down? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take that list and show you how I would handle it if I was evaluating that. So the first one we had on here was asset protection. Okay, so which one of these entities is going to provide asset protection for you? Well, right out of the box, you're always going to have asset protection with a limited liability company. What I mean by that is that if you have a property inside of the LLC and something goes wrong with that asset and somebody's injured and they sue, they're going to sue the limited liability company. And so you're down here as the member, you're not going to be liable with that LLC. That LLC is going to protect you. So when it comes to asset protection, in 90% of the cases, the LLC is the way to go. Now, that doesn't mean the land trust doesn't offer you some benefits here as well. So the land trust, let's say I give it a baby check mark here from asset protection standpoint. And that is because if you have real estate in Florida, and in that particular state, a land trust does provide asset protection. So I could set up a land trust here in Florida and put my residential real estate into it. And similar to what I have over here with the LLC, that same thing would play out the same way. That is, if something went wrong with that trust property, Clint, as the beneficiary, would not be liable under Florida law. Now, what I just described to you is limited just to Florida. So you couldn't say, well, I'm going to set up a trust. I'm going to call it a Florida land trust, and it's going to hold property in Minnesota. Sorry, does not work that way. It has to be property located in Florida. So if you want anonymity for your or asset protection for your land trust, then by itself, it's not going to reach this. So you have to take it one step further. And that's why whenever we talk about land trust, you'll always see us tell you to put that land trust into a limited liability company in order to get that big check mark of asset protection. So really what you're doing now is you're incorporating the LLC with the land trust. So we're back to that limited liability company benefit there. So on that standpoint, the LLC is going to be your better option if all you're focusing on is asset protection. All right, so what's number two? Taxation. Moving property into the entity and not having to pay a transfer tax or having that property reassessed. Now, one thing that I've learned is that in 49 states, Pennsylvania is the only odd one out there, but in about 49 states, the land trust is the way to go when it comes to taxes. So from a tax standpoint, I should probably have these. I'll just put tax here. If you can read it, I'll have tax there and asset protection up here. Okay, so from a tax standpoint, the land trust is always going to be the preferred entity. We use this a lot whenever we're dealing with a situation where there's a transfer tax or there's a reassessment, because in those situations, by moving into the trust, it does not trigger that. Whereas the LLC, it's 50-50 whether or not that's going to happen. So if you have that issue where you own property, then you are going to put that property into a land trust. But then you're going to bring that LLC back. If you want asset protection, you got to put that land trust back into a limited liability company. Okay, so the next one I put on here was due on sale clause. So let's just go back here. We'll call this one DOS. Okay, so as I indicated, the due on sale clause is when you transfer encumbered real estate that has a mortgage on it into an entity. In your mortgage agreement, typically you're going to have a clause that states that the lender, at their option, can accelerate that note and make you refinance it if you change title. Now, Freddie, Fannie, they state now under their guidelines, you can transfer real estate into a limited liability company if they own your property, of course. But if your property hasn't been transferred yet, maybe you took out a Freddie, Fannie conforming loan, but the bank is still holding on to that paper. They have not sold it to Freddie or Fannie. They could still accelerate. So for those individuals who are concerned about that, because maybe you bought your property 6 years ago at a very low interest rate, and now interest rates are much higher, and you just don't want to put yourself in a position where you have to lose sleep at night because you're worried about the bank accelerating, or every time you get a letter from your bank or a statement from your bank in the mail, you're like, oh, honey, you open this one. Tell me what it says. And if it's negative, I don't want to hear it. If that concerns you and you want to get protection, then the land trust here is the way to go. This is by far the one that's going to give you protection. The LLC is not going to do that. In fact, if you transfer property directly into an LLC and the lender discovered that and it wasn't held by Freddie or Fannie at the time, they may accelerate because, hey, why not? Push you into those higher interest rates. They're going to make more money on that loan. So for those of you that are in that scenario, I'm going to go with the land trust every single time over the limited liability company. But again, I'm going to bring that LLC in on the back end to hold my land trust because I want to make sure that I'm checking off all of these boxes. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was anonymity, right? Privacy. So if I'm setting up a structure and I don't want people to know that I am the owner of it, which one of these is going to give me anonymity? Well, in that case, they both check the boxes when it comes to anonymity. But the thing is that you just don't get it by itself. That is, you just don't set up an LLC and you're going to have anonymity. Well, maybe in certain states you can. So it depends on where you're setting it up. Nor if you just set up a land trust, if you don't do it a certain way, then you're not going to have anonymity as well. So if you want to make sure that people don't know that you own the property, if they pulled up title, there's two things you need to be aware of here. if you're using a land trust to do this, okay, then what you're going to need to use is a nominee trustee. Okay, that's someone other than you to be the trustee of your land trust. Now, I've been on, for the last 23 years, I have signed off on thousands upon thousands of land trusts as a nominee trustee. So there's property all over this country. I get contacted every day by people wanting to buy property that I don't even own, or they have a problem with my property because the tenant's dog is barking. And so they're calling me up and saying it's a nuisance and things of that nature, sending me emails or text messages because they skip trace me. Why are they doing this? Because when they look on title, they see my name as trustee, so they assume I own the property. Well, that's what we were doing. We want people to assume that. I am not the trustee. I've already resigned my position. So if you're using a land trust and you want anonymity, you must use a nominee trustee. Or you could set it up this way. You could use a Wyoming LLC as your trustee. And in that case, you don't have to go through the resignation and trustee deed that goes along with this. You could just have a Wyoming LLC that you own serving as your trustee. And the reason why I say Wyoming, because in Wyoming, no information is collected on who runs it, or members or managers. So this could be my LLC and I'm the beneficiary of this land trust, because land trusts are not recorded anywhere. People do not see the document. So they just can't pull up the land trust document and say, oh, I see who's involved here. It's a private document. That's why this strategy works. And in fact, this strategy has been used, I would say, longer than LLCs for real estate investors who desire anonymity. Now, with LLCs, you can achieve the same thing, but again, you have to understand how that LLC works. So on the LLC side, if you want anonymity, you can definitely go to a state like Wyoming and you set up your LLC. And if it owns property in the name of that LLC, well, you got your anonymity. But most of us are not owning real estate in Wyoming. Okay, we own real estate in Texas, Minnesota, North Dakota, all right, Oklahoma, Missouri. So if we own property in all these other states, how do we get anonymity for those purchases that we're setting up in a Texas LLC and a Missouri LLC? Well, in that case, what you're going to do is you're going to first start with a Wyoming limited liability company. Then you would set up your Missouri LLC right here, and you make it owned 100% by your Wyoming LLC. Maybe you set one up in California, same thing. We'll set up a California LLC over here. So we set up our California LLC and it's owned 100% by our Wyoming LLC. And the way this works is that if somebody looks at either of these two entities, if you got a tenant sniffing around, who's really behind this, it always points them back to the Wyoming company. And when they look up that information, they're never going to see you down here because Wyoming doesn't collect information on you. So those are four main differences between land trust and limited liability companies. And so you're trying to evaluate which one is best for your needs for that particular property, just go through this list. Last thing I'll leave with you here, if you're wondering about federal taxes, why I didn't talk about them, because the way we're setting these things up most of the time is they're all disregarded. So it doesn't move the needle or change how your taxes will look on the personal level. Guys, if you liked the video, be sure to hit the like button. And if you're not yet a subscriber, well, now is your time to get subscribed to my channel. Take care.